G'day, Professor Joseph Drew back with a video targeted mainly at my new PhD students. Look, if you've got PhD students yourself and you want to use these videos, go for it. That's what this channel's all about, helping people. But remember to subscribe and like. I'm getting lots of likes, so I'm thinking lots of research students are picking these up. That's fine. There's going to be lots more. I hope you enjoy and I hope you find it helpful, and most importantly I hope you subscribe, because I've got that target 500 down the bottom there, and if I'm not at 500 by the end of the year there won't be many more videos. I just can't justify the time anymore. So thanks for your help on that, and I hope you find this video helpful. So this video is quite short. It's about the 3 components to all research. There's very few research that won't hit on these 3 components. But what I find a lot editing the journals and reviewing for journals and working with students is that often these 3 components aren't all there. That's really surprising, and particularly when it's experienced academics that are forgetting to make sure all these 3 components are there. Now, this is all pretty obvious, but listen through it anyway and just make sure you are doing all these things, because as I say, lots and lots and lots of stuff is coming by my desk that isn't hitting on these 3 things. So the first thing is, what is your research question? Doesn't sound that difficult, does it? But have it very clear in your head and in your paper what that research question is. Delineating how narrow or how wide that question is. Defining each of the key terms very, very carefully. It's remarkable how many papers I get to review where it's not clear to me what the paper's about and what the authors think these terms mean. And then you write that in the review and you get a nasty last response I got back from some authors, unknown authors, was quite mean and nasty. Quite a strange way to approach getting a paper accepted as major revisions. You're not going to get the reviewer in a good mood by having a go at them. They may basically say, well, the paper wasn't meant to be about that, it was about this, and this is how we define it. And I said, well, clearly you didn't make that obvious in your first draft, because if you had, I wouldn't have misconceived it. Even the title didn't say what they thought that the research question was all about. So really tight, narrow question. Everything really, really clearly defined, and be very precise about how wide the population is, what the population is. It should be straightforward, but as I say, you read published papers where it's not clear. It should be clear. Now, I had this experience many years ago when, I guess, an early career research, and I had a rejection, and one of my co-authors was actually an editor for one of the big journals. I was very lucky to work with her. And I said, oh, these stupid reviewers, they didn't get it. I stated the question really clearly in the introduction and the abstract, and yet they're telling me they didn't know what the paper was about. And she said that they'd had editorial conferences between different journals, and they'd actually decided that if the reviewers weren't getting it, it was the author's fault. And she said, well, maybe you have to state the question precisely twice. And that is now my practice, usually 3 times. It's stated in the abstract and the title. It's stated in the introduction. The second last paragraph of the introduction, I spend a whole paragraph saying precisely what the question is. And then throughout the paper, I'll just keep repeating the question, not as a rhetorical question, as a statement. This paper is about X. You just have to keep repeating it. The truth of the matter is, now that we've got a lot of reviewers where English isn't their first language, or they're not really good at English comprehension for some reason or another, it could be their native speaker and they're not very good on comprehension, or they're not spending as much time as they ought to reviewing a paper. You need to be really clear, and there's nothing to be gained by stating it once and then abusing or saying nasty things about the reviewer when you get the paper back declined. It's not going to get you anywhere. You need to make sure it's really, really clear. Now, there's going to be a video shortly on how to get ideas for questions. So look out for that one, because that's a key, obviously, too. Your question needs to be an important question, something that no one else has really looked at, and preferably a question that has a really important practical implication. You read papers and you go, well, so what? Very exciting. I'm glad that you found this information out, but so what? How is that affecting anyone's life? It's really important to answer that so what. Now, obviously, your paper will need data. Even theory papers need data. So if you look at my paper on the principle of subsidiarity, it was at Publius, my paper at PMP on exit voice and loyalty and sortition, they've got data. Usually it's only summary, really simple data in those theory papers, but it's rare that you're going to write a theory paper even without at least some simple statistics to try to say that this is why your theory is important, or why your extension to theory or your critique of theory is important. This is why it's a real issue because of this data. So think carefully, can I get data? There'd be very few instances where you can't. If you're not getting it, I think you're not thinking carefully about the issue. I think most 99% of papers should have data, even if it's simple stuff. But what do you got to do with the data? It's not just listing a whole heap of numbers. That gets us nowhere. We're looking for patterns in the data. Something is happening all the time. And you can see those patterns by doing some correlation matrices and see what the connections are between the data. I find the patterns often when I'm typing the data in, I'll go, oh, that's interesting. And that's what often gives me ideas for papers. And of course, proper robust work, there is no substitute for things like multiple regression analysis and full disposability whole analysis and DEA and things like that. There just isn't. There isn't a good substitute for stuff like that, proper rigorous data. Because in multiple regression, for instance, you're holding everything else constant. Data will often change because population is changing and trends are changing and context is changing. In regression, you're controlling for all of that. So you're seeing what was really happening. And people are often misled. You see it with state regulators all the time by apparent trends in data. But when you hold all other factors constant, the trends aren't there at all. They're just looking at the numbers. Or people who just look at averages without standard deviations and medians. This is an exercise in stupidity. You're not going to find anything worthwhile. So I'm talking about proper, robust empirical analysis. When you're doing that, think about your audience, think about the journal. There's no point writing into a tax journal with mixed effects, regression with bootstrapping and rah, rah, rah. They're not going to know what you're doing. They're not going to be interested. PA journals tend to want simpler regression, OOS with year dummies and stuff like that. Unless you go into those super duper journals, you might want to leave mixed effects and logistic regression and all those sorts of things aside. I've done them all at different times, but think very carefully about your audience and about the journal you're going to. There's no point having super sophisticated stuff if it's right over their heads, because you're just going to get rejected and the message isn't going to get across because people won't understand it, and they're usually scared to say that they don't understand it. The truth of the matter too, and remember my first degree was in physical maths, usually the simple stuff and the super complex stuff, there's very little discernible difference in the results anyway. People bang on and on and on about these things, and usually you take it to 3 decimal places, you can't see any difference anyway. So simple is usually enough, but it depends on your audience. If you're going for a sophisticated audience and a really sophisticated journal, will do the sophisticated stuff. But most of my stuff, I want it to be applied with real people, real decision makers in government. There's no point me going over the top with stuff like that. I can do it, but what's the point of me proving how clever I am if no one reads it and I can't get it published? And the third thing that's often missing too, even from experienced academics, is theory. If you don't have a strong theory to anchor it to, your data might be misleading you. That's why we need theory. That's what Milton Friedman said. We need theory to make sure we're not being misled by our data, misled by our regression. A regression constructed without any theory to inform what regressors you're putting in there, and indeed what the regressant is likely to come up with spurious data mining like results. You've got to have a theory. And what I always recommend to students, make a long list of the major theories in your area. And once you get that research question, go through the list. Would that theory suit? No. Would this theory suit? Oh yeah, I could see how I could give it a bit of a twist, or it's a critique of that theory, or the theory matches it entirely, or no one's ever bothered testing that theory. Oh yeah, I'll use that one. Make that list of theories, know the major theories in your discipline, and the ones that are being written about at the moment are often the ones that are going to get up best in journals, or really old theories that no one's really done anything with for ages. Like I used Hirschman's Exit, Voice and Loyalty for my sortition paper. It resonated really well with my audience, my reviewers, and the journal. So sometimes those really old ones, income heterogeneity, that's a long-standing, the theory behind that's long-standing, very old, but it's never really been tested here. That's resonating really strongly too. So don't discard those old theories, but go back to the original work and read it properly and make sure you actually know what the authors meant, not what everyone said they said, which is usually nothing like what they actually said. The Chinese whispers are rife in academic circles, unfortunately. And sometimes maybe you have to theorize yourselves. Maybe you have to explain what you think will happen and why, and talk about all the different components that are moving and why you've come up with the hypothesis. Sometimes I do that. I prefer to use an established theory, give it a twist. I don't like to just use it like it is. I like to put it with another theory, or change it, or change its application, its context of its application radically, something like that, or critique it. Yeah, so don't forget the theory. It's amazing how many good papers and good journals have no theory. And if they'd had theory, they wouldn't have put those regressors in, and they wouldn't have got those really, really spurious results that experienced people who have been in this decades can see straight away, and that, you know, the reviewers and editors sometimes should have seen. So there's three components, and they're all important, and it will be a rare occasion when you don't need all three components. You need a great question, clearly defined and delineated, with practical application. So what? You need data with either simple analysis, if it's a mainly theory paper, or robust, proper analysis that you can rely on. And you need a strong theory, preferably an older one, preferably something that's really robust or has been critiqued a lot in the literature. Three components, make sure they're all there. As I said, it's surprising how many experienced scholars and good journals are publishing papers without these things, and they're getting to spurious wrong answers because they haven't got the three components. We're a social science. We can't ignore the data, and we can't ignore the theory. And whatever you do, you can't ignore the fact that you need a really good question before you even start. Okay, thank you very much for your time. Don't forget to subscribe, like, all those things. Remember, target 500. If you want to keep seeing these videos, get me up to 500. There's 528 councils. There's heaps of research students out there. There's heaps of PhD supervisors out there. It really shouldn't be that hard. Thank you very much for your time. Goodbye.